crucifixion was a common form of execution practiced for hundreds of years throughout the Roman Empire. It was carried out with cruelty and contempt for the victims, who were usually slaves or troublesome foreigners. Often a headboard was attached to the cross to explain the nature of the sentence of those who were about to die. This is the story of how one routine execution in a remote province of the Roman Empire became the central image of Christianity. It is also the story of how the first Christian emperor, Constantine, changed the face of the world by bringing the true cross back from Jerusalem. And astonishingly, it is the story of how a piece of that cross, the headboard naming Jesus of Nazareth, may have survived for 2,000 years. For as many as 1,700 years, the Church of Santa Croce in Rome has housed a small, barely legible wooden plaque. Although it's been dismissed by academics as a medieval forgery, one man believes that it may in fact be an actual piece of the titulus, the board nailed above the crucified Christ with the mocking inscription dictated by Pontius Pilate, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." If Professor Carsten Tiede is right, it is an object of unimaginable importance.
There must have been an inscription on the cross of Jesus. That was Roman custom. When someone was crucified according to Roman law, the reason for the punishment had to be indicated on a piece of wood or whatever. And as an historian, I must say that all the arguments, all the indications that we can assemble, that we can put together, would help us to come to the conclusion that it is not just legend, not just myth, but history.
And history involves historical people. Carsten Tiede set out to see what lay behind the biblical accounts of the crucifixion. Although obscured by religious language and iconography, crucifixion was an agonizingly painful way to die. Jesus cried out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?"
We believe in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, eternally begotten of the Father, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten not made, of one being with the Father. Through him all
The familiar words of the Nicene Creed have contained the essence of Christian belief since 325 AD. To this day, they're spoken in thousands of churches around the world, in scores of languages.
For our sake, he was crucified.
Significantly for Tiede, behind these words lurks an historical figure, Pontius Pilate.
Crucified under Pontius Pilate.
Pilate was a minor and vicious Roman official who presided over hundreds of executions. He's remembered solely as the man who sentenced to death Jesus of Nazareth. For Tiede, he provides a direct line to the titulus. This ancient, worn piece of wood, bearing some of the most potent and moving words in the Bible, has only been removed from its case 4 times in the last 600 years. The Vatican has been reluctant to grant permission for scientific dating. Nonetheless, by examining the textual evidence, Tiede believes that this piece of wood was inscribed on Pilate's orders on the day of the crucifixion.
Let's not forget that this was Roman history. The man who had crucified Jesus was a Roman prefect, and the inscription on the cross of Jesus was a Roman inscription. All this is part not just of Christian history, it's part of Roman history. Therefore, it's a legitimate story that we are trying to follow.
Carsten Tiede bases his controversial claim that this is the headboard of the true cross on his study of biblical languages and ancient texts. He's a distinguished expert on biblical manuscripts, like this parchment from the Judean desert.
What the ancients called tachygraphy, kind of shorthand writing. But some letters are obviously, like over here, for example, that's the Greek delta. Down there, there's the Greek alpha, and so on. So you know it's Greek shorthand.
I can see. I can see.
Here in Jerusalem, in the John Rockefeller Museum, we have contemporary evidence, 1st century BC AD. That's exactly the period of Jesus, of the crucifixion, just before and after. So we are looking for letters or whole sentences that give us the type of handwriting, the style of writing that comes as close as possible to what we have on the titulus. And thus we can date the titulus, the handwriting, on that piece of wood.
It is this detective work that has led him to believe that the titulus is the real thing, brought to Rome in 326 AD on the instructions of Constantine the Great. The discovery of the cross remains led in time to a trade in mementos and relics which reached epic proportions. By the time of the Crusades, the market was flooded with fake religious souvenirs. As a result, the authentication of relics like the Turin Shroud is notoriously contentious. There are thousands of cross relics like this piece of wood, which is said to be the cross of the good thief who was crucified beside Jesus. Because most relics are at best doubtful, it took a brave man to claim that the titulus, almost unnoticed in the church of Santa Croce, was not a fake. But Santa Croce hides a secret which Tiede believes adds weight to his theory. The 18th century portico and facade are not what they seem. The church celebrates the arduous journey made by Helena, the mother of Constantine, to the Holy Land, where she's said to have discovered the true cross in 326 AD. The magnificent exterior does not reveal that it is built onto a much older Roman building, and that behind this are Roman ruins. And these ruins and part of the church are the remains of Helena's own palace. It was to this very place that she would have brought part of the true cross and the titulus, and it is on this very spot that the titulus has apparently remained ever since. In the church itself, Helena's discovery of the true cross is recreated in frescoes above the altar. Helena is depicted as a young woman, and the whole event is shrouded in pious medieval myth. But Helena's journey would have started here, and she certainly lived out her remaining days here. Tiede started with something which was thought to be a fake, and asked the question, could it be coincidence? Everywhere he found clues that it was much, much more than that. Not far from Santa Croce is a seldom visited monastery, Quattro Coronati. In its small chapel, a wonderful series of frescoes from the late Middle Ages tells the story of Helena and Constantine. Tiede believes that within these legends, genuine historical facts about Helena's journey are contained.
I'm looking for evidence, for historical evidence, and even in the High Middle Ages, there are remnants of true historical knowledge, and some of that may have been covered by later legends, stories that have come up in the tradition of the Church. We have Helena, with the 3 crosses. She is pointing at one of them, probably the one she wants to see tested first. There's that later legend that the true cross could only be identified by someone being healed when he or she was touched by it. And then the next stage, that's the mystery. What happened there? It's certainly something we can't see, we don't know anymore. And that's part of our quest to find out, what was it? Was it the titulus?
And Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross. And the writing was Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. This title then read many of the Jews, for the place where Jesus was crucified was nigh to the city.
The accounts of the crucifixion of Jesus, what happened, the fact that he was crucified according to Roman law, that there was a Roman headboard, a Roman inscription, that isn't just fanciful gospel storytelling. It is a fact corroborated by non-Christian literature and well established within Christian literature.
Carsten Tiede believes that the surviving section of the titulus is actually only a part of the whole board, reading Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, in 3 languages, Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, in that order.
This is an order of languages that does not conform to any of the surviving literary sources in the 4 Gospels or any other later account. So that alone means it can't be a late forgery. A forger obviously copies an existing model, but all models, all the Gospels or other models have a different order of languages.
To Tiede, this is evidence that the titulus must have been written before the Gospels, because a forger would surely have copied the order of languages in the Gospels.
Second, what one also realizes immediately by looking at this piece of wood is that the 2nd and 3rd line, the Greek and Latin lines, are written from right to left in mirror image writing. Now, writing from right to left is, of course, the Hebrew way. It would be correct for the 1st line, but not for the Greek and Latin text. Again, no one will ask for a forged titulus that was so obviously wrong. So these are the 2 starting points, the 2 things you see immediately. Striking observations that rule out a forgery straight away.
Reversed, the reconstructed mirror writing suddenly becomes clear. We can read Jesus of Nazareth. Tiede was the first scholar to give this serious thought. He speculates that it was written on Pilate's orders by a Jewish scribe accustomed to writing from right to left. Although he can't prove it, Tiede believes there is further evidence that the titulus was not written in a later era. This letter is an abbreviation used at the time, but which died out by the end of the 1st century.
We know, of course, what the earliest possible moment in time was. That's the 7th of April, AD 30, when Jesus was crucified. And that for an historian, for an epigrapher or papyrologist or philologist, that's brilliant evidence. You know the earliest possible moment in time when it could have been done, but you also know when it ended, when this type of writing, this typical way of writing Hebrew or Greek or Latin stopped. So you've got a frame, you've got a beginning and an end, which is, in our case, the one we want to establish, the 30s of the 1st century.
Convinced that the titulus was not a forgery, Tiede's next task was to establish how it came to Rome. Helena's journey to Jerusalem was the result of her son Constantine's desire to unite the empire, a process that had started 20 years earlier in York. In the year 306, Constantine was acclaimed emperor here on the far northern fringes of the Roman Empire after the death of his father. The empire was divided between 4 competing emperors, and Constantine became ruler of the West. York was the start of Constantine's journey to mastery of the whole Roman Empire. But first, he had to take control of the divided empire. His eyes turned inevitably to Rome and to his bitter rival emperor, Maxentius.
It was a question of kill or be killed, eat or be eaten. The experiment of having 4 emperors in the Roman Empire was never really going to work, and that the sooner that he got his plans together and took positive action, preemptive action, the better it would be for himself and for his family.
Although Constantine was far from being a Christian at this stage, he and his advisors had noted the growing power of Christianity, even in the remotest parts of the empire. These Orantes, or early Christian praying figures, were found in Britain, 1,000 miles from Rome. For Constantine, this was not a religious issue so much as realpolitik.
I think Constantine's conversion was a gradual conversion. It was a conversion to a god whom was in some sense identifiable with the sun god Apollo, and yet was also identifiable with the Christian one supreme God.
6 years later, Constantine was ready to attack Rome. He had first to cross the Milvian Bridge, guarding the northern approaches to the Eternal City. It was here that he had a vision of the cross. It was reported that it appeared in the sky above his encampment. This was his road to Damascus. His biographer writes,
Constantine was advised in a dream to mark the heavenly sign of God on the shields of his soldiers.
So he ordered his men to use this early Christian symbol, the Chi Rho. This was to be the first official use of a Christian cross in the Roman Empire. Although outwardly it did not depart far from the traditional Roman military designs, Constantine was hedging his bets. On the morning of October the 28th, 312, Constantine attacked the superior forces of Maxentius. Armed with the sign of the cross, he triumphed. Maxentius fell mortally wounded into the Tiber. Constantine was master of Rome, the wellspring of power. He was quick to celebrate his own achievements. He built a victory arch right at the center of Rome, close to the Colosseum itself. The frieze on the arch shows his advance on Rome, carried out with the mercilessness traditional on these occasions. It concludes with his address to the Senate, an event of great symbolic importance. He depicts himself as a true Roman, at ease with Roman traditions. Soon after his victory, he'd extended toleration to all Christians. But the only hint of what he was contemplating is in this discreet tribute to divine inspiration. What he had in mind was something which would shake Rome to its foundations: the adoption of Christianity by the whole empire. This enormous statue once stood on the Capitoline Hill. It sends an unmistakable message to pagan Rome. Here is a man determined to impose his will on the empire. Although by now he was leaning towards Christianity, Constantine could still be utterly ruthless in the best Roman tradition. He murdered his own son and his first wife believing they were conspiring against him. They were officially obliterated from the public record. After establishing himself, Constantine looked for a defining principle for his diverse empire, a glue to hold it together. Christianity was flourishing in Rome, and Constantine was politician enough to see how it could serve his purpose. In the Christian catacombs under the streets of Rome, there is abundant evidence that by the time Constantine took power, Christianity was irresistibly on the rise. Previous emperors had tried to snuff it out, but Christianity was replacing the Roman gods and symbols, which can still be found here. In a time of transition, Constantine understood that he could not be left behind with the Roman gods. The signs of Christianity's growing confidence are everywhere, although the cross itself was not the icon we know today.
The cross was not an object of veneration. It was something to be almost imitated in prayer. The position of the first Christians was a cross-like position to interpret, as it were, that as a Christian, you followed Christ even into martyrdom, even into death. You won't find crosses, you won't find scenes of people dying. All the symbols and inscriptions are about hope. It's hope in the resurrection. Therefore, we have the dove as a symbol of hope, the anchor as a symbol of hope. The fish that was prepared by Jesus after the resurrection for his disciples. And of course, we've got the Chi-Rho, the Christ monogram, the first two letters of his name in Greek. What Constantine did very cleverly was to reinterpret it, to make sure that people understood that the old system, the old value system, the old symbols, the old science had now acquired a new Christian, a true and deep Christian meaning.
Constantine became almost infatuated by the symbol of the cross. I think that he associated it very closely with his victory over Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312. And I think thereafter, the cross became the center of his idealism and his ideology.
The cross had become Constantine's talisman, the symbol of his triumph. Now he needed something more substantial. His next step was to make that symbol reality. To do this, he needed evidence. Carsten Tiede has come here to the British Museum in search of Helena, who played a key role in the whole story. Constantine enlisted the help of his formidable mother to mount his takeover of Christianity. This is one of the earliest known depictions of her.
Helena was someone who came from not a very privileged position. It's believed that she probably came from somewhere near the Black Sea, and that she was a bit of an outsider, a bit of an upstart, and not quite worthy to be the first wife of any emperor or prospective emperor. So she was a character who was very much a self-made person, and someone who was driven with ambition for herself and for her family.
Helena, the daughter of an innkeeper, was Constantine's father's lover. She'd been pushed aside when he married, but remained close to her son throughout his rise to power, and appears to have been as tough and ruthless as he was. Constantine certainly trusted her enough to dispatch her to the Holy Land to bring back the concrete evidence he required of the new religion.
I think for Constantine and for Helena, it was very important that Christianity was a historical religion which had historical traces and which could be found and held onto and seen and exported around so that everyone could see that this religion was a true historical faith.
Carsten Tida has followed Helena's journey all the way to the Holy Land in his efforts to link her to the discovery of the titulus.
I've become convinced that from an historical perspective, that it is a true story, that she did go to Jerusalem and that she did find the sites and some objects that were related to the historical Jesus.
Helena was 80 years old when she started her epic 2-year journey to the holy places. Something entirely new in history was underway, the first royal pilgrimage.
Helena's journey to the Holy Land was the logical conclusion of the Christianization strategy that she and her son had been implementing for more than a decade. They had very good reason to believe that when they got to Jerusalem, they would find something.
Ultimately, Helena reached Jerusalem in the year 326 in her search for the holiest site in Christianity, the site of the crucifixion and resurrection. Many sites are either lost or buried today under 2 millennia of occupation and rebuilding. When Helena arrived 200 years after the crucifixion, they were still well known. But it is vital for Carsten Tida to know that Helena was looking in the right places if he's to prove that the titulus is genuine. The question of the authenticity of the holy sites, and particularly the location of the tomb of Christ, has long been a subject of controversy. But now most historians agree that the site of the crucifixion is here, at the domed church of the Holy Sepulchre. Layers of history lie one on top of the other. 100 years after the crucifixion, a Roman temple to Venus was built in the new Roman city of Aelia Capitolina, above the site. A contemporary writer records that it was already being demolished on Constantine's orders and replaced with an enormous Christian basilica.
When Helena arrived, I think what she found in progress was the demolition of the Roman temple and the beginning of the works of the construction of Constantine's great complex on the site. Of course, it's a very interesting question to know whether he got the right place. And I think the answer to that today is probably he did, because 30 years before, Eusebius had actually described the Golgotha as the place of the crucifixion, which is in Aelia, in the Roman city of Aelia Capitolina, to the north of Mount Zion. In other words, it was a Jerusalem place name, and he says, which is pointed out now. And that was 30 years before Constantine. So I think there was a well-known Jerusalem landmark which guided Constantine's excavations.
During the first centuries of the Christian era, there never was any rival site to Golgotha, the one site which is now covered by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Rival sites were invented, if you like, in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The problem that irritated many observers, many historians, was the fact that Golgotha, i.e. today the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, is within the city walls. And the Gospel story and the letter to the Hebrews and other documents tell us that Jesus was crucified outside the city perimeter. So that was a contradiction, apparently, until archaeologists discovered that in 41, 11 years after the crucifixion, a third wall was built. And therefore, when Jesus was crucified, Golgotha was well outside the city walls.
The evidence that this is the true site of the crucifixion and the place where Helena found her relics lies deep and is attested by marks left by generations of Christians. Here, the Crusaders incised crosses into the walls 1,000 years ago. And even further down below the Holy Sepulchre is this almost unknown chapel. Here, a fascinating piece of graffiti was discovered 25 years ago and identified by Israeli archaeologist Mogan Broshi.
It wasn't so elegant as it is today, but it was pretty clear. One thing is for sure, the pilgrims are from the Latin West.
This depiction of a typical boat of the time was left here by pilgrims from Europe who knew this site as Christ's tomb long before Helena arrived.
From North Africa. And there is no doubt that this is exactly what was done here 16 centuries ago.
What fascinates me about this example of a graffito is that they're inspired by the Bible. I mean, this is a quotation, Domine Evimus. It refers back to Psalm 122, doesn't it? Domine Evimus, we are here.
Which is a psalm of pilgrims. And this is what they have in mind. They are grateful that they have been saved from all the dangers in the sea. They are grateful to the Lord, and they are grateful to be in this holy place. So, I mean, there's no question. Only Christians could have done it.
For Tida, this graffiti is more evidence that Helena came to the right spot. And it is yards from here that Helena, herself a pilgrim, is said to have discovered the crosses.
When the pious lady hastened to the spot pointed out to her by a heavenly sign, she tore down all that was profane and polluted there. Deep beneath the rubble, she found 3 crosses lying in disorder.
The legends describe Helena discovering the 3 crosses in a quarry or well. There was a difficulty deciding which was the true cross. This was settled by placing the crosses in turn next to a sick person who was miraculously healed by the true cross. For Tida, there may be some truth in this legend, because here at the place where Helena is said to have excavated are a cistern and a quarry.
This is an ancient place, it's an ancient quarry underneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It was here a long time before Christianity appeared on the scene. The titulus was discovered with the cross, or the 3 crosses, in a cistern, looking almost like this place here, in the humidity, in the wetness, which is, of course, an ideal condition for the preservation of wood. So all the details come together in this one place and tell us that this is a site of history and not of myth-making.
But there is a question to be answered. Could the titulus have survived at all without rotting away? Tida first observed these wooden writing tablets from the same time as the titulus in a museum. They're Roman letters and notes, written in ink. They were found in 1973, still perfectly legible, in damp conditions in northern Britain. So Tida sees no reason why the titulus should not have survived here. Under the rock of Golgotha, Helena's discovery is remembered. At first sight, it seems unlikely that the titulus could have come to rest here. But Tida believes that the events of the crucifixion offer the explanation.
And they took Jesus and led him away. And he, bearing his cross, went forth into a place called the place of a skull, which is called in the Hebrew Golgotha.
The crucifixion of Jesus was, by the prevailing standards, quite brief, but nonetheless agonizing. Victims were first scourged, and the nails, research reveals, were driven through the wrists and the heels to support the body during its slow asphyxiation.
There were many different ways to crucify. I mean, there were different crosses, there were different ways to crucify. I think the sadistic ingenuity of the crucifixion team probably depended upon how one was put on the cross.
Josias is a Jerusalem-based physical anthropologist who's made a study of burial techniques and ancient tombs.
It's difficult to tell whether Jesus was crucified with 3 nails, 4 nails. The reason that most Christian depictions show 3 nails, it fits in well with theology, which is the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, the Holy Trinity.
Scholars have claimed that the crucified were denied a Jewish funeral. For Tida's theory to be plausible, he needed to show that the Romans would have allowed the body and the titulus to be removed from the cross. there is dramatic evidence that crucified Jews were indeed taken away for burial. The remains of a Jewish crucifixion were discovered in this ossuary, bearing the name Yehohanan.
In 1968, there was an archaeological find here in Jerusalem, outside of Jerusalem, where they found a Jewish tomb, Jewish ossuaries from around the time of Jesus. And what we found here, this is what's called the calcaneum. This is the right heel bone. And we can see clearly here, we can see the nail, which is running laterally into the heel. If you look closely here, we can see there's a plaque of wood. There's still evidence here after 2,000 years here in Jerusalem that we found evidence for the wood. The wood acted as a washer. It then went into the heel. What probably happened now was it went into the tree. It probably struck a hard knot or something. It fish hooked, and then they took the individual down from the cross. It was impossible to remove the nail. So they buried him with this nail in his foot.
This man went unto Pilate and begged the body of Jesus. And he took it down and wrapped it in linen and laid it in a sepulchre that was hewn in stone, wherein never man before was laid.
Historians now believe that Joseph of Arimathea's tomb was just below the hill of execution, within what is now the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Joseph of Arimathea asked Pontius Pilate explicitly to be allowed to take the man from the cross and bury him, and therefore he would have been the person to have taken and preserved the inscription and passed it on to members of the family of Jesus, like Mary, who was actually also there.
But the Gospels also report that Jesus rose from the dead and the tomb was found empty, the stone rolled away. Tita cannot be certain, but he believes that the cross and titulus were preserved by early Christians beneath the hill of Golgotha, which was a well-known burial site. Finally, they were buried, as the legends suggest, underneath the Roman temple, to be found by Helena in 326 AD. Helena is believed to have divided her finds into 3 sections for distribution around the empire. She's said to have left one part, including a section of the titulus, in Jerusalem, where it soon became a major attraction.
Just about 20 years later, it is absolutely clear that there is something which was regarded as a relic of the true cross there, and in the 380s, the pilgrim Egeria saw it, and indeed she saw something she calls a titulus beside it as well.
Another part went to Constantinople, which Constantine had made capital of his empire. In 330 AD, he rode his horse in the hippodrome, using a nail from the true cross as part of the bridle to demonstrate the reality of Christianity. This part of the true cross was lost in battle, probably in the 8th century. Helena herself returned to her palace in Rome with a part of the cross and part of the titulus. There she died, mission complete, 2 years later. But her legacy was immense. The cross had become Roman property. Temples became churches, and the pagan gods were replaced. After Helena, nothing would ever be the same again.
Helena's finding of the cross was of great excitement, not only to Constantine, but to many people in the Roman Empire, who saw the cross as now the sign of spiritual victory, the sign also which Constantine himself had been inspired by and had conquered under when he won his victories and brought toleration and the end of persecution to Christians throughout the empire. So it was a very important symbol. The cross, in a sense, came out of the closet. It came out from underground. The cross was now proclaimed. There were now facsimiles of the cross allowed to be made and to be used in religious services and liturgy. So that was something which had not happened before. It's interesting that the crucifix at the same time, however, was outlawed by Constantine because he saw that as a shameful thing. For him, the cross was a sign of victory, not a sign of defeat.
Christianity had been impelled to prominence by Constantine and his mother. The cross was to become the most powerful and recognizable symbol the world had ever seen, the expression of Christianity's triumph, its logo. Constantine continued his slow personal progress towards Christianity. He banned crucifixion in 337 AD and was himself baptized finally just before his death. A coin shows him ascending into heaven in a chariot, which is suspiciously pagan in appearance. He was ambivalent to the last. In the centuries after their finding, the true cross relics were to suffer many reversals of fortune. For 7 centuries, that part of the true cross and the titulus left by Helena in the Holy Land were on display during a long history of capture and recapture of the holy places. When the first Crusaders took Jerusalem in the 11th century, they paraded the cross in battle. With the true cross on their side, defeat was inconceivable. All along the Jordan Valley, they established a network of castles in their efforts to keep the Holy Land safe for Christianity against the Muslim forces.
This castle is called Belvoir Castle. It's one of the most important of all Crusader castles in the Holy Land. And they took the fragments of the true cross and the titulus of the cross that Helena had left behind in Jerusalem with them into battle from such a castle and paraded them in battle against the opposing forces. They did this for some 200 years. Finally, they lost it all in the decisive last battle in the horns of Hattin here, right behind us, and it was lost for good.
Here, beneath the horns of Hattin, a terrible battle was fought in 1187, as Saladin, the Muslim general, defeated the Crusader army under Bishop Acre, who rode into battle bearing the relic.
The cavalry charged in wave after wave among the floating mists of the mirage and the torments of thirst with the fire in the wind and anxiety in their hearts. These dogs hung out their parched tongues and howled under the blows. They hoped to reach the water, but before them was hell with its flames, and intolerable heat overcame them.
The true cross was burnt, believed to have been lost forever. Christendom's most precious possession was reduced to ashes. But if Tida is correct, a piece of the true cross survived, brought here to her palace in Rome by Helena as her personal relic. It remained hidden until it was rediscovered in 1492 behind a fresco in a chapel said to be Helena's own reliquary. It was placed in a casket concealed by this stone. The rediscovery of the titulus caused immense interest. Michelangelo himself made his only wooden crucifix, which records the mysterious mirror writing. And El Greco, too, painted the languages of the headboard. And this is that same piece of wood, which Carsten Tida traces back to Golgotha, the place of crucifixion. We can still make out clearly the Greek and Latin lines and the remains of the Hebrew. And there are traces of what could be the white and red pigments the Romans used to color these headboards. The wood itself has been identified as walnut, common in Roman times and found all over the Mediterranean. It was this piece of wood that Tida believes Pontius Pilate ordered to be placed on the cross of Jesus 2,000 years ago, mocking him for claiming to be the King of the Jews. And it is to Pilate that Carsten Tida returns by a strange twist for his final evidence. On this stone, which is the only inscription ever found that refers to Pilate, Tida observed that the style of the letters is identical to that on the titulus. It is a style which died out in the 1st century, so Tida believes it cannot have been written later than the century of Christ's crucifixion.
I am completely convinced that the titulus is the authentic inscription headboard on the cross of Jesus. Needless to say, it's not a mathematical equation. We can't prove it like 2 + 2 is 4. We can't do that. We can't do that with so many things from antiquity. We don't know whether Alexander the Great ever cut the Gordian knot or Caesar ever crossed the Rubicon. But up to that degree of certainty or uncertainty, I am convinced that the titulus is indeed what was above the head of Jesus on the cross.
We may never know the truth of the origins of this piece of wood, inscribed with some of the most powerful words in the Gospels. But Professor Carsten Tida has obliged us to look at it anew and ask important questions about it. But it's indisputably true that Constantine and his mother changed forever the course of history. For it was they who spread the symbol of the cross around the known world. And it was they who made a routine execution in an obscure part of the Roman Empire the central image of Christian redemption.
And when he had called the people unto him with his disciples also, he said unto them, Whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever shall save his life shall lose it, and whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it.